Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. Here's your host, Chris Lee. Commodore fans, on your feet. It's time to anchor down.
Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast presented by Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. We are part of the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today is Will Perdue. We'll talk Vanderbilt football, the game with Wake Forest, and the one ahead with Northern Illinois. Will appears on the guest line that is presented by Michael Kendrick of the Kendrick Group. Michael is a local carpenter and a lifelong Vandy fan. He builds bookshelves, cabinets, picture frames, furniture, and made-to-order items, including a display case for my prized Dale Murphy jersey. I have seen Michael's work. He is a true craftsman. If you're in the market for custom woodwork, give Michael a call, 615-830-9458. If you've got sports memorabilia you want turned into furniture or displayed, Michael's the guy to call. Now on to our interview with Will. Will Perdue joins us. It's a Tuesday night. Vanderbilt has a game with Wake Forest in the rearview mirror. A game with Northern Illinois on the horizon. I know Will's watched it a time or two. And Will, thanks for joining us tonight. Hope you're doing well.
Well, Chris, doing well. I've had some time to digest the Wake Forest game, and as you'd mentioned, did not get a chance to see it live as it happened, but did DVR it and watched it Saturday night, and then wrote some things down, and then went back and watched it again on Sunday, because there were some of the stuff I wrote down, I wanted to go back and look at some specifics of the game, and I started thinking about, hey, these are some good topics for the podcast, and you and I have already talked, so, I feel like I'm well-versed in the Wake Forest game.
Yeah, and with that, I guess let's get your overriding thoughts. I know we both talked a week ago. Thought it was an important game, not a must-win game, but certainly a game if Vanderbilt won, could really signal some good things ahead. Unfortunately for Vanderbilt, it didn't turn out that way, and really from the end of the first quarter on, the game was never really in doubt, which was disappointing. I know Clark Lee talked some about it today. I think you've watched the press conference, maybe or maybe not. I know you usually do. Okay, so with all that, your take on things?
Well, I think the one thing that I went back and watched differently the second time through for the Wake Forest game when I watched it on Sunday morning was, I think we forget sometimes that last year Wake Forest won 11 games. They averaged 41 points a game. So you knew they could score. And then I went back and I looked at my notes and I saw where the spread prior to the announcement that Sam Hartman was going to play, they didn't even mention if he was starting. They just mentioned that he was cleared to play. The spread went from 6 to 12. And you're like, holy cow, that's a huge jump. 6 points to 12 points? I understand this guy's good, but is he that important to this team? And I think we saw that the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, he's going to end up being the all-time record holder at Wake Forest by the time this season's over. And I truly believe and would not be surprised to see him somewhere on an NFL roster. Now, let me be very clear. I'm not saying for getting a lot of snaps and playing, but being a backup somewhere, being on the practice squad initially, bouncing around the league because of his IQ, his ability to make passes, his ability to read the defense, his ability. It was just, I'd have to say that considering that was his first action, they talked about during the game, you were at the game, so you didn't hear it, But Dave Neal and Deuce McAllister were talking about how he was participating in practice, but he wasn't doing anything, live action type. He wasn't lining up an 11 on 11 type things. So that was kind of like it's kind of like you talk about a golfer who pulls into the parking lot and walks straight to the first tee. No warm-ups, no nothing, and just strikes one down the middle of the fairway. He stepped on and he was accurate. He was ready to go. And you realize, now I understand why the spread went from 6 to 12. Okay. But one of the things that jumped out, I knew this, but Clark talked about it in his press conference, was as much improved as this Vandy team is, regardless of who they're playing, an SEC opponent, a non-SEC opponent, they just don't have the luxury of being able to withstand turnovers, period. And when you had the turnover, and not only just turnovers, but the type of turnovers that Vanderbilt had, and the ability of Wake Forest with that offense, with Sam Hartman as their quarterback, to strike quickly. And as Clark talked about in his press conference on Tuesday, what was it, like basically a 6-minute span where the game pretty much got out of control?
Yeah.
And you knew from that point on that Vanderbilt wasn't coming back. And that's one of the things I like about what Clark does. I think, he's not going to give you all the answers, because there's some stuff he can't. He's not going to, because he feels like he's revealing too much information about his team to the other opponents. But when he talked about mindset, he talked about attitude, he talked about the learning process, he talked about how this team got knocked back on their heels and they never really recovered. So they still have work to do, not only physically, but mentally. And that's part of this process that that he's working on and change. You just don't come in and say, okay, snap your fingers and I've changed the culture. We play hard, we practice hard. It's still about the learning process, about the mental toughness. It's about, dealing with adversity. So, he was disappointed on how that happened. I thought that they did a pretty good job of kind of righting the ship eventually, but it took too long for that to happen. And they just don't have the big game players to overcome something like that.
Yeah, I thought Clark basically said it the way you and I did today, that they're not built to withstand that. And I thought this was sort of a barometer game for them, right? And I think that the first couple games were too. We know they're good enough to beat bad teams decisively now. We didn't know that a year ago. We know now that, like a top 25 type team, there's a good bit of distance between them and Wake, but at the same time, you play that game over again. What were they, minus 2 in turnovers? There was a little bit of a feeling that, I certainly walked away feeling they didn't play anywhere near their best game. And I think Clark said that today too. And I do wonder, if they're sharper, what does that look like?
And, let me throw something in there. And I talked to you about this, and I know this is kind of I'm interjecting, so I'm kind of disrupting the flow. But Clark didn't mention it. But obviously, whether it was body language, some things he heard going on behind him during the game, the frustration coming out vocally, by the players. I think, and this just isn't about, Vanderbilt getting screwed by the officials. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it's time for the SEC, and quite honestly, the NCAA, at all levels. And when I say all levels, I meant to say all sports, meaning football, basketball, baseball, because this is a big business. This is what this is. It's time to go out and hire these umpires, officials, referees, full-time. When Vanderbilt and all the other SEC schools are getting checks in the summer for $35 to $45 million from the SEC network, there's obviously plenty of money in the kitty. The NCAA is a nonprofit, but yet they make $1 billion a year. It's time for them to start investing some of that money into their product. And their product includes officials. And the reason why I say that is that these kids, these teams, regardless of what team it is, and in this case, let's make it the SEC, deserve the best and they deserve consistency. And the reason why I say that is and I'm not saying, and let me be very clear, I'm not saying that, these three instances cost Vanderbilt the game. Absolutely not. But I'm saying that if something like this happens in the SEC championship game, if this happens in the expanded playoffs in the next couple of years, or quite honestly in the 14 playoff right now, it could cost the SEC millions of dollars, right? So you think about that first late hit on Sam Hartman. He was still in bounds. He was fighting for yardage. So I disagree with the call. But okay, you make the call, deal with it. But then there's a call later on in the game that to me was much more violent on Mike Wright. He already had 1 foot out of bounds. And when I rewound it, now granted, that's not on game speed, but it was helmet to helmet. How do you first of all miss that call? And because of the violent reaction of Mike Wright's body, how do you not at least review that call? Especially because I feel like Clark has been pretty good on how he's handled the officials. And he was livid. That's the most animated I think I've ever seen him at any one time going after officials. And they still didn't react. And then finally, the third thing I'm referring to is the 46-yard pass play that's called pass interference. When it's obvious when you see the replay, the receiver for Wake Forest grabbed the defender's shirt from Vanderbilt, threw him out of the way, caught the ball, and then Vanderbilt was called for defensive pass interference. And you're like, how is it possible that A, you can't review that, and B, you missed that call? It was blatant. And there were two officials. Now, only one official threw the flag, and that was the official coming from the middle of the field, not the guy that was actually running the sidelines where the play actually happened right in front of him. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say maybe he was blocked out. But my point is, what if one of these calls that's blatantly wrong happens in one of these games that affects all 14 SEC teams? Because, when Alabama or Georgia goes to the national championship game, all 14 SEC teams benefit. They get a piece of the pie. And something like that happens at an inopportune time that changes the momentum of a game and pretty much causes a team to lose. That's significant. And it's time now for, I think the NCAA and maybe the SEC be the leader, of the Power Five, and hire these officials full time, to where you're constantly doing seminars, you're constantly reviewing plays, you're constantly, in the off season, you're going to each university and doing 7-on-7 scrimmages to stay sharp, not working some other job from Monday to Thursday and then hitting the road on Friday to go to Tuscaloosa, to Nashville, to Athens, to do a game, getting home on late Saturday night or Sunday, and then doing another job. I think that needs to be addressed. But to go full circle, because of stuff like that happening, and I think this was, again, why Clark mentioned it, it affected their mindset, it affected their attitude, it affected, how they approach the game. Because they're like, listen, how can we win if the officials are making these bad calls and not helping us? I mean, it was kind of like the perfect storm as far as kind of how the officiating went. It wasn't egregious like they were cheating or anything, but it's just the timing and what happened, what resulted from those plays was devastating more to the mentality of Vanderbilt than it was to the overall game itself. But again, let me be clear. I don't think that, Vanderbilt would have won if it wasn't for those three different plays. But I think the outcome would have been a little more competitive than what the score actually led people to believe that didn't watch the game.
Oh, okay, I have two pet peeves when it comes to officiating. And I can take the occasional just obvious bad call or missed call, because that's just going to happen. You give officials a couple thousand calls a year, and even great ones are just going to whiff on one every now and then. The two things that drive me crazy are plays that obviously need to be reviewed. Like, I thought the hit on Hartman, and maybe the whistle blew, but I mean, I was watching that through binoculars. He still had at least 1 foot still in bounds. And so I think you usually don't see a guy blow a play dead that quickly. I think you need to give some benefit to the doubt to the defender. The second one is when they call the hit on a quarterback, when the defender is a foot away and the guy releases the ball. I'm like, what are you supposed to do? You can't stop on a dime when you're moving that fast. Those are the ones that just drive me crazy. The ones where they should at least say, hey, maybe we made a mistake on this call. It's worth a review. And then the ones where they don't give anybody any time to adjust.
Yeah, no, you're right. And listen, I know it's not a perfect science, but I think I was trying to make people understand there's a bigger picture here. I'm not saying that cost Vanderbilt the game, but what has to happen before the NCAA or one of the Power 5 conferences realizes our officials need to be better. And we need to put our officials in a better position to succeed than what we're doing with them right now. And for them to say that, well, it's not financially feasible is a bunch of BS, and everybody knows it. And it's something that I think it's time for that to happen.
Well, having dealt with the NCAA personally on the bat situation this year, which I think bats got tampered with egregiously, probably in several places. And I know I'm getting us off track. I know that foresight and good of the game and all those things. I don't think that even occurs to them until the train wreck has long happened.
And unfortunately, that's after the fact. So, all right, we interjected that. Let's get back on track and get back.
I enjoy going off track sometimes, but go ahead.
But it was kind of interesting. I know Clark was very delicate when he addressed the quarterback situation in today's press conference. And just remember, when you're listening to this podcast, and we're referring to today, this podcast is being taped on Tuesday evening because we wanted to try to get it out there as soon as possible. But I wrote something down, and I wanted to read it as I wrote it. And I think you saw what Wake Forest did. If you can contain Mike Wright on the ground and at the line of scrimmage, he cannot beat you with his arm. And that's where, I'm sticking by my prediction that they're going to win an SEC game. But as you heard Clark today talk about in his press conference about, the offense has struggled the last 6 quarters, inability to protect, the shrinking box. And one of the reporters asked about, well, how do you expand the box? Your ability to spread the ball out, your ability to pass down the field. He's not going to stand up and go, well, we got to do better than dink and doink. He can't do that. But that's where, and I know for a fact, because I have had these conversations with this over the last 3 days with more than one former player, offensive player, defensive player, that A.J. Swann is the future. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about that whatsoever, right? And he's 6'3", 225. He's got accuracy. He's got touch. I think I thought he did an excellent job of commanding respect. I love the body language, but he gives you a weapon that Mike Wright just doesn't have. And that's the arm strength, the accuracy, and the ability to throw the ball down the field. So it's Clark's in a predicament. I understand, he's stepping up and saying this is still Mike's team. Mike is still starting. This is more than just about, the quarterback. The offensive line has to do a better job of protecting to make things easier for him. That's a very true statement. But, as they continue to ramp up the level of talent of their opponent, so now you're going from Wake Forest and you're taking a step back against Northern, but then Katie bar the door. I think I know it's Alabama, then a week off, then it's, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but it's Ole Miss, and then it's Georgia.
That is correct.
So, you ask yourself, where are we? What is the end game as far as the goal for this upcoming season? We know where we are as I'll say organization, in kind of taking the professional approach, whether you want to call it a rebuild, regardless of what you want to call it. They're trying to get this team, this athletic department back to prominence. And again, let's be very clear. I think we talked about this in previous podcasts. When we say prominence, we're not necessarily talking about national title contenders at the moment. We're talking about the ability to be competitive on a yearly basis in the SEC. We're talking about when you have a bad season, it's 6-6. But we're also talking about, on average, you're 7-5, 8-4. And maybe your schedule comes out right. You hit teams when they've had major injuries. A skill position player, whether it be a wide receiver, a tight end, a quarterback, a running back is hurt, and you go 10-2. And now, as we've seen, they keep expanding the field when it comes to, playing for a national championship. Maybe you squeeze in or something. I mean, that's a long shot. I understand. But we're talking about prominence of being more than anything a competitive, legitimate SEC team, to where we're not having to deal with people talk about, oh, Vanderbilt doesn't even belong in the SEC. I disagree with that statement, more so because of baseball and tennis and other sports, because it's golf, the success that they've had, women's bowling. Our opponents can chuckle all they want about that, but we still are national champions. But just the ability to take the front page sports, the football and the basketball, and be more competitive consistently. And I think we're on the right path, but I think we'll all agree that we still have a long way to go.
On the quarterback situation, just some context for fans who aren't on the site and aren't reading the practice reports, which I did one for every practice this year. The Mike Wright that you have seen over the sampling of the season is exactly what he is. There will be some huge plays at times. The struggle to throw is there. I think anything beyond about 10 yards downfield it is a struggle for him a lot of times. I think a lot of times he's better between the hashes than outside it. Now he can hit some passes a little deeper. You saw it to McGowan 2 weeks ago. He will drop a deep ball in there at times, but I think that's what he is. Ball security has been an issue, and that includes the fumbles. I think Mike's got to take better care of the ball. But the thing about Mike, sometimes some kids just play better in games than they practice at times, and you've seen that a little bit from Mike, and so you just never know. He could come out against Northern Illinois and have another 6-touchdown game. It wouldn't shock me. I do think the limitations come into play a little more in SEC play, and my dog is just going bananas. So I apologize to our listeners for that. Yeah, I keep thinking he's going to wear himself out with all the barking, but it's not happened yet. But anyway,
well, you don't have to worry about anybody breaking into your house. That's for sure.
No, I don't. This guy's got his eye on everything. Apparently, I don't know what has upset him for 15 minutes straight, but it's something. The other thing is with Swann too, and I know people are really excited, but I'll just warn people. Part of the Swann package too is going to be mistakes. And there will probably be a lot of them if he plays a lot. I'm not saying that. If they have decided he is the future, they're charged as a staff for doing the best for the program, and I respect that. But there will be some moments with him too, and there'll be some great moments, right? I mean, the kid can throw darts. He's the best, probably deep ball thrower on the team. There will be some moments of excitement, but my goodness, there's going to be growing pains too. I just think that you've got to, at this point, hope that you can get Mike through the Georgia game, and I think some of that's health too. I am concerned about Mike holding up to hits just because he's so thin. No, Mike plays with some toughness, and so I'll give him that credit, but I just do wonder about the stature and how that's going to work. I think hopefully Mike can stay healthy, bounce back. He's a good kid. He's fun to watch. He's easy to root for, but that's kind of the reality of the situation right now.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, I was having a discussion with a former Vandy player that played football, and he mentioned that, if Mike Wright truly wants to have a professional career, the sooner that he changes position, the better. And I just mentioned it because I'm a guy that lives in Chicago. I'm the guy that's a Bears fan. I watched a guy by the name of Devin Hester make a career out of being a special teams player, meaning returning punts and returning kickoffs. And that's what is the best thing about Mike Wright? His speed, his breakaway speed. So I understand that players have egos, right? I played with an ego. I always felt like I should have played more than I ever played, whether it was at Vanderbilt, with the Bulls, with the Spurs. The mindset now is a little different, and guys sometimes say, I'm playing too many minutes, but I always wanted to play as many minutes as possible. If you're going to play me 48, I got no problem. I think I deserve to play 48. So I understand Mike Wright not wanting to step down. Nobody's going to be like, hey, coach, I think it's best that you put A.J. Swann at quarterback. But I think even he knows that he's not an NFL quarterback, right? But at the same time, you start looking at your future, and you're like, in my future, where am I best suited if I want to play at the next level? Wide receiver, special teams. And I'm not saying, hey, this is what he needs to do, but it always amazed me, and I never understood. I don't know Tim Tebow personally, but he won the Heisman as a quarterback at Florida, but at the college level. Okay. And yes, he won some games at the NFL level, but he wasn't an NFL quarterback. So why was he so stubborn? Why did he refuse to play tight end? I always remember, and this is just from personal experience, once I got to the NBA, I would have done anything to stay. You want me to do more defensively? Done. You want me to score more? Done. You need me to pass more? Done. Because it's the passion that I had to compete, but also the intelligence I had to be like, where the hell am I going to make this much money doing anything else but playing professionally? So if you need me to do something else, my hand's in the air and I'm volunteering. And that attitude got me 13 years in the league. So I'm just curious, if that registers with him about where his bread is buttered as far as, playing after college. Or maybe he thinks that, when college is over, he can then make the switch, because we've seen basketball players that have really never played a significant amount of football do that and play in the NFL. So maybe he feels like he can do that. But I always sit here and I start thinking about putting Mike Wright out on the hash and just teaching him how to run some routes. And then basically, and I think that, interesting enough, Vanderbilt put on their Twitter account today, AJ Swann in practice, that thing must have been in the air for 50, 60 yards. And the receiver just running right underneath of it and just catching it in stride and going. So what if you do if you just come out and to push back, as Clark talked about, in order to, how did he say it? Expand the box and prevent your opponent from shrinking the box. The first play takes a 7-step drop, throws that thing up in the air, totally unexpected, because right now, what is Vanderbilt? A running team. Because right now, their most talented players are in the backfield. They're a run-first team. You're technically passing the ball to open up running lanes. But what if you 7-step drop and he just throws that thing up in the air and allows Mike Wright just to come out of the starting blocks and run right under it? There's not a lot of guys that are going to be able to keep up with him. And that's something that's going to be totally unexpected. And all of a sudden, that expands the box. It's no longer shrinking, because they're like, that guy right there, that freshman's got a cannon hanging off his right arm or hanging off his right shoulder. So now we got to back up, because these receivers got a little more pep in their step, because they know if they work to get 40, 50 yards downfield, there's a quarterback right there that has the arm and the accuracy and the touch to get me the ball. And as you said, Mike Wright can do that occasionally. But again, he's not going to beat you with his arm. He's going to beat you with his legs. But give Wake Forest credit. They found a way to contain him. As you increase the level of talent, and what was the one thing that you saw Wake Forest had? They had some speed. More so than Elon, more so than Hawaii. And what do you think is going to happen as that talent level increases even more with Ole Miss, with Georgia, with Alabama, So it'll be interesting to see where this goes, and this is why Clark and that staff get paid the money that they do, because there's got to be some changes made to that offense, whether it's play calling, whether it's scheme, whatever it may be, to give that team more success to be able to compete at a better level. And Clark said that, they just, I thought the defense played well enough that if the offense could have been able to move the ball, they would have given themselves a chance to win. I didn't say win, but given themselves a chance. I just didn't feel like, because how much the offense struggled, they really ever had a chance to win.
This season of the Vandy Sports Podcast has been made possible by my friend Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. When it comes to general or cosmetic dentistry services, Jody is the best in Nashville. Just check out his client list. It testifies to that. He sees movie stars, music stars, athletes, coaches, you name it. Jody is the dentist of choice for stars in Nashville, but he sees regular folks like you and I as well. What people love about Jody's office is the ambiance. It's relaxing, it's friendly. Someone described it to me as a tooth spa. Whether your needs are general or cosmetic, go see Jody today. Call him 615-270-2322. See him at 55 Music Square East, not far from downtown or the Vanderbilt campus. Jody is a former Vanderbilt football player and a huge Commodore booster, so go and talk Vandy sports with him while you're there. Go see Jody Jones today. Thank him for his support of this podcast, because without it, this season would not be possible. You know, the interesting thing, will be, let's say A.J. Swann ends the year with 3 or 4 starts at quarterback. Mike's got a decision to make. Because I do believe the door has been open to him for a position change. And again, I'm not throwing dirt on Mike's career as a quarterback yet. He's got a chance to recover. And look, if he plays well against Northern Illinois, Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, he's going to be their quarterback. But let's say it doesn't go well and A.J. Swann takes that job. Would he rather spend 2 years at Vanderbilt getting his degree, maybe learning to play somewhere else, or is he willing to, roll the dice and try his hand somewhere else? Because I'm guessing if it doesn't work for him here as a starter, it's going to be a group of 5 team, or it's going to be an FCS team. So how he weighs all those options if it got to that point would be interesting.
And the fact that you mentioned it, listen, to make sure we're transparent and we try to cover everything, Ken Seals has a choice to make after this Northern game, does he not?
Well, and interestingly, I was at practice today. We were doing interviews, and Ken Seals was the last guy to leave the field among the quarterbacks that I saw. He was throwing after practice. So that's a kid who certainly hasn't packed it in. Well, I mean, he hasn't played any games yet. So he's not, I guess he could not play at all and keep a redshirt year and stay on the roster. But yeah, that's one to watch, because Ken, I think, does have the talent to play quarterback somewhere.
But doesn't he have to make a decision after the 4th game, like redshirt, transfer, or can he? And I don't know specifically, but there was a discussion, being had amongst me and other Vanderbilt athletes about exactly what the rules were as far as a red shirt or transferring, or how that works.
I think the red shirt rule period is you play in parts of 4 games. Up to that, you can keep your red shirt. Beyond that, you lose it. I think that's the rule. Maybe I've missed something, but if there's a deadline beyond that, then I need to look that up.
Well, I'm sure that if we got that incorrect, somebody will let you know.
Oh yes, people will let you know when you get things incorrect. They love
to let you know.
They do. They very much love to let you know.
Well, let me ask you this question, and I know the answer. All the former players that I've talked to the past 2 days have said the same exact thing. Not only is this game against Northern a must-win, but I think it's a must-win in a very convincing fashion. And the reason why I say convincing fashion, because I think to kind of take this whole podcast full circle, was to hear Clark talk about the mindset, the attitude, the learning process. Because I think that this team is still working on, as he said, rebounding from adversity, the ability to handle bad calls, the ability to come back from mistakes, and not just individuals, but the team as a whole, body language. So, I think I think that Clark has their attention, obviously has the utmost respect, no ifs, ands, or buts about that. But, it was kind of interesting to hear him mention that first, more so than the mistakes that they made throughout the game. The mental and emotional aspect that, this team still needs to work on. And that's why I kind of, stepped up and said, hey, not only is this a must-win, but it's a must-win in a convincing fashion to kind of get back on. Now, listen, I know you got Alabama coming up and Ole Miss and Georgia. You can talk about that all you want. But, and I keep harping on this. Sometimes the games you're supposed to win are the hardest games to win because there's no pressure on Northern in this game. It's all squarely on Vanderbilt, on the shoulders of Clark Lee, his staff, Mike Wright, the offensive line, the defense. It's across the board. This is now, I think we all felt that if they could beat Wake and be 3-0 going into this Northern game, it'd be icing on the cake. Wake's a legit team, won 11 games last year. Quarterback is really, really, really good. Okay? But now I do know for a fact that the coaching staff, former players, fans are, I don't know if excited is the correct word, but are very interested and want to watch because they want to see the response. How do they start the game? How do they play the game if something goes bad? There's a bad call. Or say, for example, there's a scramble by Northern Illinois' quarterback who's decent, solid, whatever word you want to use. Say he just throws the ball up in the air for a jump ball, 60 yards down the field, and both the Northern Illinois receiver and the Vanderbilt defender go up for it. The defender, hits the ball, but it just bounces in a funny way, and somehow Northern Illinois gets it. The Vanderbilt defender falls down and he walks into the end zone. That's a devastating play. How does Vanderbilt respond in a game that they're supposed to win? And something, dramatic happens early on that they get down and they have to come back. And you're like, oh my God, that couldn't have been a worse start. How do they respond? Because it's kind of interesting to hear Clark talk about how Northern got down by 24-7 or something last week.
Yeah.
A pretty significant number, but yet they came back and won the game.
Well, lost the game, but did take a fourth quarter lead.
I'm sorry. Yes, I apologize. That is correct. I got a little excited. I'm actually kind of out of the corner of my eye. I'm watching this White Sox-Colorado Rockies game because the White Sox are currently 3 games back of Cleveland. So, but, it's just there's still so much for this team to improve on, and it's not just physical ability, it's not just talent, it's not just execution, it's also mental toughness, handling things emotionally, not reacting. The ability to handle and control your emotions and channel that energy into helping the team win games. So we've still got a long way to go, and the one thing I will say that, we talk about things they're doing right. I love the uniforms. I know all of a sudden I just pulled that out of thin air, but they've hit a home run with the uniforms. When I have watched these games and seen what they've done with the uniforms, I think they've done a great job. And, it's just, and I know we're kind of jumping around a little bit here, but let me just ask you a question, and we'll end it here. Or do we need to get to the mailbag?
We definitely need to get to the mailbag.
Okay, so let me just throw this out there and let's get to the mailbag. Clark has mentioned, he hasn't specifically talked about what positions, but he's mentioned that they need to improve their talent level, as does every school, correct? But if, say you're a 4-star, 5-star receiver, okay, and you start to figure out, if you're smart enough that, everybody's wondering, if you're a 5-star, just go to Alabama, just go to Georgia. Well, so are four other wide receivers. And maybe at coming out of high school, they might be a little better than you. You're 4.3 and they're 4.2. So every time you guys run the 40, they win. It's close, but they win. If there's a deciding factor and both players are even, I as a coach are probably going to lean more towards the guy that can do 4.2 than the guy that can do 4.3. What's the difference? If you guys are equal in skill level. But I'm thinking right now, if you obviously AJ Swann is going to get more reps, but you continue to see his arm strength and his accuracy and everything, wouldn't that as a receiver get you excited to be like, hey, yes, I'm getting recruited by Alabama, Georgia, Oregon, Michigan, every Big Five, Texas, Oklahoma. And I know this is rare, but what about Vanderbilt's got a quarterback that's got an arm? I mean, I could be his number one target in over 12 games. I could get 70 or 80 catches. That's going to make my draft stock go up. I may not win a national championship, but that's really going to improve my draft stock as I continue to climb the draft boards. And after 3 years with, anywhere between 150 and 200 catches, I think that scouts would have a pretty good idea of what my capabilities are.
Well, there's two things here, okay? There's that. There's also the fact, and I would say the same about Mike Wright and Ken Seals too, but AJ is a little bit of a leader. I think was pretty aggressive in trying to help them land other kids from the moment he committed. So I think the combination of a guy who can sling it mixed with a guy who's willing to put himself out there at the forefront of our program and help us go get more dudes, there might be something to that.
And the reason why I mention that is because it's a bigger picture thing. I know we're focusing on the here and now, but it's just that's one of those bigger picture topics.
Yeah. Well, speaking of bigger picture topics, we've got a few in the mailbag, so we'll go there. That was is sponsored by Sutherland and Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one's been hurt in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call. That number, 615-846-6200. See what your rights are and if they can help. Ann Arbor says, who beat Vanderbilt on Saturday, Vanderbilt or Wake Forest?
Wow, I think it's a combination of the two, but I still think that, Wake Forest is a legitimate team. Are they a team that's going to contend for a national championship? No, but they're a team that, I think you could say is a middle of the pack SEC team, a team that's going to a bowl game. So, at the end of the day, you can say that Vanderbilt lost to a quality opponent, but they didn't help themselves with the turnovers. And that's the other thing. They don't have the ability to make those type of mistakes because they just can't recover from them. And that's where, as we just kind of mentioned, that's where recruiting comes in. That's where talent comes in. That's where mental toughness comes in. And Clark talked about, those things have to improve and they need to get better.
Yeah, the topic got started on my board, whether do they win the game if A.J. Swann's a quarterback. No, Wake still wins the game. And, yeah, Vanderbilt made some mistakes. But I think anybody that walked away thinking, maybe Vanderbilt's a better team and can win under some circumstances, if this or if that, I just don't think they were watching the same game that I was watching. Now, look, again, they play that over again. I think they play a cleaner game. I think it's closer. But I think that was a little bit of a statement game about how far they have to go.
Yeah. And that's where we talked about, best case scenario, they're 4-0 after Northern. And we knew the toughest game of those first four was going to be Wake. So, two things. the quality of opponent of Hawaii and Elon compared to Wake equals still have work to do.
Absolutely. Okay, Papa Hick 4VU says, do you believe Vanderbilt will bounce back on Saturday, or do you foresee a losing streak that is likely to continue for the next several games, if not the rest of the season? You know, this is one of those, if they can't win this one, where do you find a win left on the schedule? I'm not saying that it's impossible, because it doesn't always happen that way, but this certainly seems like their best chance, and I think if they don't win it, your optimism has to wane a little bit.
Well, I think, and that's why I called it a must-win,
yeah.
Chris, because if they don't win, if
I
they
would
don't
agree.
win this game, there is. Let me put it this way. Again, and now this will be the second time I mention in this podcast, I will stick by my prediction that they win an SEC game this year. That being said, if they lose to Northern, I will retract that statement. Because to me, then that tells me that this team has a lot farther to go from a mental toughness standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, than we thought. There was a reason that Clark Lee started off today's press conference by mentioning that. And I think he was sending a message to his team loud and clear. And I know they've talked about this in the off season, about the ability to handle adversity, about the ability to shake off mistakes, even if it's mistakes by the officials, not, you know, and that's something you can't control. So that's why, you know, this Northern game, and that's what I mean by not only must win, but win convincingly, to where you walk away not saying, woohoo, this team now is going to be able to compete against Alabama, but come away, when I say convincingly, meaning they were supposed to beat Northern, they're better than Northern, and they did exactly that, and that's a great way to respond to the Wake loss. Okay? Now, enjoy it, have fun Saturday night, but Sunday, better put on your big boy pants, because it's, you know, what is it? Out of the pot into the fire, or whatever it's called.
Something like that. You just had me at big boy pants. I'm thinking, how hard must clothes shopping be for you when you look for big boy pants?
Well, when it comes to like my suits and dress slacks and stuff like that, I get all that stuff made, because it fits better, and it's just easier than buying something off the rack and then having to let the hem out, try to adjust it, you know, to get the proper fit. You know, in certain areas, you got to go with the bigger waist and then bring it in. And, you know, it's, you know, and here's the best part. So, you know, my best friend is a guy from Vanderbilt by the name of Kevin Watson. And anybody that's been to Vanderbilt knows that there's no athletic dorms. So my freshman year, I know it sounds like a prison term, but, you know, here's the basketball team, the football team, the golf team, the baseball team. We're all over at Branscombe, mixed into the general population, you know. And Kevin Watson was just a regular student. He was on my hall on the first floor, 2 doors down. I had, you know, when I first got to Vanderbilt, and these are the stories that people will really get entertainment out of. When I first got to Vanderbilt, and I don't know, honestly, if that's still the case, the tradition was that you went to Vanderbilt football games with a date, with a coat and tie. And I was like, I will not wear a coat and tie to a Vanderbilt football game. I refuse. And then I see that we go to the first game, and it's me and a bunch of guys, and we're like, what's out of place here? That would be us. right? So I'm like, all right, I'll bite. I'll get a date. I'll wear a coat and tie. But again, as you just mentioned, because I'm constantly growing, my coat and tie consists of khakis and a blue blazer and a make sure you catch this, a clip-on tie.
I love it.
So and the only person that I feel comfortable asking is a young lady by the name of Becky, who was on the tennis team. And she said yes. So, she gets dressed up, I get dressed up, you go to lunch, you go to dinner, whatever it may be, and then you go to the game. And I just remember sitting at the game in the afternoon in the blazing hot sun, just profusely sweating and just thinking about how ridiculous this is to do this. But also in order to do this, my freshman year, I didn't have a car, and I needed a car so that we could go to dinner afterwards, right? So I literally went down the hallway knocking on doors. Can I borrow your car? I don't even know you. That's not the question. No. Next door. Can I borrow your car? For what? No. I knock on Kevin's door. I know him barely because we've had interjections on the hallway. I think we played a couple, 2 a.m. wiffle ball games together when we should have been studying or possibly sleeping. And I said, hey, dude, can I borrow your car? And he's just like, he reached in the drawer of his desk, grabbed his keys and threw them to me and just like, sure. And I specifically remember walking away going, oh, going back, A, what kind of car is it? And B, where's it parked? And it was a 78 Camaro, faded blue paint, because he was on a farm in Simpsonville, Kentucky, and had been parked in the sun all these years, and had a broken tail light, and the passenger side door was about to fall off, so you had to open it up a specific way so that it didn't fall off, and it made this horrible creaking noise. But I was like, it's either this or nothing. And that right there started a friendship that, as we joke now, we've actually known each other longer than we haven't.
I was just like hoping, just for comedy's sake, that it was a Mazda Miata or something like that.
I do joke with people that I occasionally have friends that have the Mini Coopers, and I jump in and I drive it, and they're like, how are you doing that? And I'm like, it's not comfortable, but I actually can drive a Mini Cooper that is a standard by driving on the wheel with my right hand and reaching underneath my right leg with my left arm and switching and changing the gears. Because of the angle, I can't take my right arm and take it under my right leg and switch the gears, but I can take my left arm underneath my right leg and grab the shaft of the stick shift and and change the gears that way.
This sounds like automotive twister.
Well, it's just one of those things like, I bet you can't drive a Mini Cooper. I'm like, okay, watch this.
Right.
It's one of those things that people, never even think twice about because they don't have to worry about. But yet, I find a challenge in, driving a Mini Cooper.
They make YouTube for moments like this, right?
Yes.
We need to see that.
I try to, people that follow me on Twitter know that I usually don't tweet much except during the basketball season, because it's just, I don't engage in Twitter warfare. It's a waste of time, right? In my opinion.
Yes.
But some people love it. They love trolling. I just like, what do you get out of this? They're like, it's fun. I'm like, it's a waste of time. But It's just I try to keep my name out of things like that as far as Instagram and YouTube and stuff like that go.
Well,
I get myself in enough trouble.
If you do the aforementioned driving thing, I want a video of it, and I will publish that on our Vandy Sports YouTube channel. So
you got it.
Just request / fair warning there. So, all right. On that note, we got a few more here. We're going to rewind to last episode. This is from Fake Vandy Lance. Which Days of Our Lives character do you most identify with?
Well, actually, we'll expand on that. I watched Days of Our Lives just enough to be able to strike up a conversation late night in an establishment. I don't want to use the word bar. I'll use the word establishment. But I kind of was more of a General Hospital guy. I became a huge Luke Spencer fan. Or in this case, it's Anthony Geary is his name. I think that's how you pronounce it. But I was kind of like a big fan of his because he was just so unpredictable. He was the troublemaker, the bad apple, So it's just, that's kind of the guy that I related to. I apologize. I did not answer the question from a Days of Our Lives standpoint, but that is a little more information on the college level that I became more of a General Hospital fan than I did a Days of Our Lives fan. But as I pointed out, Days of Our Lives was the most popular soap opera watched by the Vanderbilt co-eds in the late 80s.
All right, we got a couple questions left. I think I'm going to save these for the next mailbag, perhaps, but I will get one more in for the sake of timeliness. Chi-Town Door says, will you be going to the NIU game this weekend in DeKalb? Also, would you be up for joining the Chicago alums for watch parties this season? The bar is George Street Pub in Lincoln Park.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's some good information. Can you
learn all
also,
kinds of stuff
Chris,
on the podcast.
Yeah, can you text that to me?
I will.
And to where those watch parties are, I'd love to go to one, quite honestly. Back to the question. I unfortunately will not be at the game this weekend. I'm going to attribute this to the beverages that I may have had during my time at Vanderbilt in the off season of killing off brain cells, that I didn't put two and two together that I was going to be out of town. And I've known that I'm going to be out of town since like June. But I was talking with some of the guys here in town about, hey, we're trying to get together with all the football players, alumni. Is there an event going on? What's happening? And, working with Greg Smith and other people and, Kirk Williams and these guys, about gathering in a specific parking lot and buying tickets and tailgating and all this stuff. And all of a sudden one day it hit me. I can't go. That's the weekend of the Naismith tournament. And what I mean is that one of my teammates, Barry Goheen, is the president of the Atlanta Tip-Off Club. And the Atlanta Tip-Off Club presents the Naismith Player of the Year every year in college. Men's Player of the Year, the Women's Player of the Year, the Boys High School Player of the Year, the Girls High School Player of the Year. And every year they have a big fundraiser in September. I don't pick the date. I'm just told when the date is, and it's that weekend. And all of a sudden it just like hit me. I got the email from the Naismith Awards people, and it said, hey, the date is this is the schedule. And I'm like, crap, that's the same weekend as the Northern game. So I've been trying to lead the charge to get, all this stuff together, and now I can't even go. But that being said, I will be watching the game from Atlanta with Barry Goheen, Barry Booker, Steve Reese, Charlie Dahlem, maybe some other, alumni from Atlanta on Saturday afternoon. So, I will be in attendance, but not at the game, just watching on TV. Unfortunately, because I actually was really looking forward to going to that game until I realized that I had a schedule conflict.
Well, I texted you the location, so fair warning, will be crashing your party one day in Chicago, guys.
That's right. I just want to know who's buying.
Bring Kirk with you. He's a good one. So,
yeah. Well, that was the other thing. I'll tell the story about why Kevin and I are such good friends is I always had a knack. Initially, it was by accident. I promise you. And then it just became a standing joke that, I never, early on in my Vandy days, because I was struggling to grasp, the time management aspect, the priority aspect. Occasionally, I'd go out with these guys, the normal students, to O'Charlie's, and those that have went to Vanderbilt in the 80s and 90s know what these places are: Spats, San Antonio Taco, and inevitably it'd be time to go, and I'd be like, "Crap, I forgot my wallet." And like I said, initially that was unintentional.
Oh shoot!
But then it became kind of a running joke, and I would just, we'd order, and we'd have, a few beverages, and be it San Antonio Taco or one of these restaurants, or Pizza Hut that used to be there on the corner, or having late night pancakes at IHOP because it was open 24 hours. And our group was 6 or 7 tight, meaning we traveled together. And the bill would come, and it got to the point where they all would look at me in unison and be like, "Did you forget your wallet?" And I'd be like, "As a matter of fact, I did, just to prove you guys right. Appreciate you picking up the bill."
You were smarter than given credit for.
And more times than not, Kevin was the one that would pick up my part of the bill. And I've tried ever since then to repay him in more ways than one, not just monetarily.
I missed that IHOP. That was a good place. And with that, we will end the show tonight. We'll hoping we can do this again next week after the Northern Illinois game. Thanks for joining us. It's always a lot of fun. And be safe in your travels to Atlanta, and we'll hopefully catch you next week.
All right. You got it, Chris. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. We thank our presenting sponsor, Jody Jones, DDS. We thank our other sponsors, Sutherland and Belk, and MyPerfectFranchise.net. If you're interested in sponsoring this podcast, and that's how we make this work, please email me at chrisley70@gmail.com. We also ask that you subscribe to our website, vandysports.com. That is $99 a year. You get things there that you don't get here. And of course, please rate, review, and subscribe where you see our podcast. That helps us get noticed. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at vandysports.com. Follow me at chrisley70. And finally, subscribe to our Vandy Sports YouTube channel as well. Thank you for listening to the Vandy Sports Podcast, which is part of the 440 Network. I'm your host, Chris Lee. We'll catch you with another episode coming very soon.